Good evening, everybody. We have another question and answer session tonight, and I believe a few questions have been sent in, so might as well begin. Oh, no, only the new ones. Yeah.
Dear Ajahn, what do the Abhidhammas mean? I've heard that in a chanting, and it comes after Kusala Dhamma and Akusala Dhamma.
That's a good question. Abhidhamma comes from that first line of the Buddhist funeral chanting. So if you've ever attended a funeral and the monks do chanting, there'll be a lot of Pali words you quite possibly don't understand the meaning of. Most of the words come from the Abhidhamma, the third basket of Buddhist teachings. We have the Sutta, the Vinaya, the monastic discipline, and then we have the Abhidhamma. And it's the Abhidhamma is a detailed analysis of the human mind. Sometimes they call it Buddhist psychology, and particularly talking about the mind or consciousness and describing the different mental factors which appear in each moment of consciousness. And that's going on all through a human life. And so they say Kusala Dhamma, and that refers to skillful mental factors which arise in a moment of skillful or wholesome consciousness. So it could be faith or mindfulness or metta, for example. And then Akusala Dhamma, unskillful or unwholesome states of consciousness. So for example, the mental factors that arise in such a state might be rooted in anger, or in jealousy, or in some form of greed, and so on. And then you have Abhayagata Dhamma, which are those states of consciousness that are neither wholesome, making wholesome karma or unwholesome karma. They're, you might say, neutral. So that refers particularly to, say, like our sense contact, just seeing. Your eyes see, and you have consciousness arise. You see light, you see form, shape, color. No karma is being made at that point. This is the result of past karma. So it's resultant karma, what we call vibhaka karma. So upon a moment of seeing, then you may have karma start to form based on what you see. You see something you like, you might start to experience interest or greed, desire for what you see. You see something you don't like, unpleasant, you may experience some ill will or aversion. That is karma, but the actual seeing is the result of past karma. So it's karmically neutral. And the Buddha and the Buddhist teachings describe things in their completeness, a very complete teaching. So just pointing out some of our mental states, moments of consciousness are wholesome, some are unwholesome, and some are karmically neutral. So even a moment of enlightenment, say somebody practices all the way to Nibbana and they experience what we call Arahata Magga and Arahata Phala, meaning the fruit of the path and the fruit of the Arahant, the fully enlightened being. These are the cause. The cause is the practice that has led up to that point. all the practice that person has done. But the fruit, say the fruit of Nibbana, is actually the result of all that work. And so it's vibhaka karma, or resultant karma, so it comes under the abhayagata Dhamma description. It's the result of what has come before. So once somebody is fully enlightened, they've reached Nibbana, they're what we call an arahant, from then on they make no more karma, because the sense of self and the attachment to the sense of self is completely gone on every level. There's no more causes in the mind for suffering. So they say the arahant or a Buddha makes no more karma. So all their moments of consciousness are what we call giriya citta, meaning they're just, the arahant speaks or has a thought or goes about their business, but no karma is being made. Everything is just a function of the mind. So they think something, or they say, or they do something, perform some action. No karma is being made because there's no more sense of self. The mind is empty of self. So all their actions become karmically neutral. So all the actions of an arahant are abhayagata Dhamma. They're no longer developing the path or making good or bad karma. So for completeness, you have wholesome karma, unwholesome karma, and then karmically neutral states of mind. So that's something you can expand on for those who are interested in studying the Abhidhamma, learning more. You can open the books, and there's a lot more to be said, but for now maybe that's enough. Interesting, in a more practical sense, many of the teachers I grew up with in Thailand, Ajahn Chah or Ajahn Mahabua, they'd often joke at Buddhist funerals, perhaps because when people come to a funeral in Thailand, often it's a very pleasant social event. A lot of family and friends come together who haven't seen each other for a while. They do listen to the monks chant, maybe to a Dhamma talk, make offerings, but it's often not done in a very solemn way. It's often quite a relaxed, happy occasion. And so sometimes the monks just point out that, if people are going to a funeral and they're just seeing it as a social event, the food, who you meet, who arranges the flowers and so on, you understand why people behave in that way, but often they're not very mindful of the actual event, what's going on. A person has died and their consciousness is going into the next birth. Many people are just not thinking of that or aware of that side of it, so they often ignore the chanting and they're just talking to their friends. So the monks often will point this out, and they say, when you're alive, you forget to practice mindfulness or keep the precepts, you forget to listen to the Dhamma, you forget to use your time well. You're just hoping when you die that there'll be some monks there to chant for you, because the belief is if there are monks chanting at your funeral, some merit is made and that merit will help you in your next life. But the teachers point out, the best way to prepare for your next life is live your life, this life, in a good way. Practice the Buddhist path, mindfulness, train your conduct in sila, practice kindness and compassion and so on, and make some real merit in this life. Don't just die hoping that your relatives will get the monks along to do the funeral chanting, because that's not really a very good guarantee of what's going to happen in your next life.
Dear Ajahn, please kindly talk on realizing Dhamma with getting rid of craving and getting rid of avijja.
Well, I can only talk from my experience so far of practicing the Buddhist teachings in this life, because completely ridding your mind of craving and avijja is nibbana. The absence of avijja, or ignorance, misunderstanding of the truth, the absence of craving basically means nibbana. But in your daily practice, you can certainly study and learn from your experience about craving and what it does to your mind and how it is the cause of suffering and stress and all the kind of misery there is in the world, whether it's other people's stress or our own. You can learn from what craving does by developing awareness, mindfulness of craving. And you can become aware of when craving has gone quiet in your mind and how peaceful and at ease your mind is when craving is absent. And when it returns and rears its head again, how much mental agitation and stress it brings up. And by reflecting on the stress, the suffering that craving causes, you get that strong intention that you want to abandon craving. The more you see the suffering that comes from it, the more you want to abandon it. So it's an area to develop awareness. What is craving? How does it manifest? Well, there's different kinds of craving. Sense craving, so craving for sights, desirable sights, sound, taste, smell, touch, and then thoughts and concepts and ideas in the mind. These become the basis for craving when we have no mindfulness or wisdom in the mind. So when the mind is being affected by ignorance, a lack of wisdom, our mind tends to run with all its different reactions to sense stimulus all the time through the day. So you see something you like, your mind moves towards that, starts thinking about it, wanting it more. You see something you don't like, your mind resists that, wants to get rid of it, move away from that visual experience. Or it could be a taste or a smell, or it could be internally, just a memory pops up, a pleasant memory, your mind grasps at that with craving. An unpleasant memory, your mind grasps at that with another kind of craving, what we call vipawadanha, aversion. And this kind of process which ignorance of the truth, lack of awareness is prompting craving, which is prompting and stimulating more suffering, small or great. That process is going on all the time through our life, through every day. And this is what the Buddha and the Buddhist teachings are pointing to. You're developing this sense of inner awareness so you can see what is going on. And that's why meditation, developing mindfulness and developing insight, is so central to the Buddhist path of practice, because it's bringing you to see craving, see it as the cause of suffering, and then the practice of letting it go with wisdom, with understanding. Once you understand it as the cause of suffering, you'll want to let it go. It's the right thing to do, or the correct thing to do. So the progress in the Buddhist path is about this, developing that skill of recognizing craving and abandoning it. And those who become enlightened, whether stream enterers, the first level of enlightenment, all the way up to arahants, they're people, men and women, who have learnt to do this well to the point where they're gradually purifying their mind of craving to the point where it's finally gone. There's no more craving left to condition the mind. The mind has fully chucked it out, got rid of it, because it's the cause of suffering. And if you know that for sure, you wouldn't want to hang on to it. The reason we still get stressed in life is because we haven't known for sure in our own mind yet that craving is the cause of suffering. Sometimes we see it, sometimes we miss it, we're deluded.
Dear Ajahn, how do we tame the mind when confronted with an insult or when something untrue is said to us? To keep silent will only aggravate the other party. What should we do? Is it okay to say a white lie?
That's a very commonly asked question. How do we tame the mind when confronted with an insult or something untrue is said to us? Or maybe you're answering your question there because if you don't like it when something untrue is said to you, then probably to say a white lie in response to it is not the best, because you're responding to one lie with another lie doesn't sound really good. So in the world, living in the world, in society, whether at work or at home or whether you just got two people living together or a whole group, the Buddha encouraged us to develop the 4 Brahmavihara Dhammas, these sublime attitudes, as ongoing, constant practices through our life to help develop the skillful attitudes to deal with the sort of problems that come up, dealing with other people, the conflicts, the misunderstandings, the rivalries, and sometimes even the aggression or the insults. So those 4 Brahmaviharas are metta, goodwill, as a basic practice to develop on a daily basis. Compassion, so empathy, being more sensitive to oneself and others in terms of suffering, and developing the wish for oneself and others to be free from suffering. Mudita is sympathetic joy, sharing in the joy, the success that you have, that others have in your life. Then equanimity, developing that ability to maintain equanimity in the face of different karma that comes up for oneself, for others, particularly undesirable karmic results of one's past actions or someone else's past actions coming up for them, maintaining balance and equanimity in the face of that. So these 4 things are meditations, but also practices through body, speech and mind that we develop every day. So it's natural there'll be, from time to time, people misunderstand us, we misunderstand others, we lose track of what is truly useful and beneficial for ourselves, other people lose track of that. And when we lose track, we lose our mindfulness, our awareness. We say things, we do things which can harm others, harm ourselves. So when someone else is doing that, they're insulting you, they're causing you trouble in one way or another, the sort of simple practice in any of those situations is always to establish mindfulness, first of all. Bring your attention to the present moment, to the situation, where you are, who you're talking to, what's going on. Because there's not one simple answer for every situation, but bringing up mindfulness allows your wisdom faculty, your intelligence, to function at that point. So you're paying attention when you're mindful, and you see what's needed, who it is. Like some people can insult you, and maybe they're a good friend, and it might still be an unpleasant or unskillful thing they've said, but because they're a friend, you can maybe shake it off quite easily. But if it's someone in authority or someone who can hurt you in more profound ways, well, maybe you have to pay much more attention and think about what they're saying. Doesn't mean to say what they're saying is good or right, but maybe there's more consequences to what they're saying. It's, depending on the situation. So bringing up mindfulness and then wisely reflecting, paying attention what goes on will help you learn from that situation and maybe help you understand what's the best response. Because there's not always one simple response. Maybe you have to be patient with them, not say much at all, especially if someone is very emotional and worked up. Whatever you say or do probably can't help them at that moment, perhaps. Maybe whatever you say may make it worse. So sometimes just staying quiet until they've calmed down a bit, and then maybe you can have better communication. Other times you may have to say something. Somebody challenges you, maybe they say something untrue about you, or maybe you have to just present what you understand to be the truth, which may be different from what they say, and all you can do is say what you know, what is true. If they don't accept it, well, there's nothing much you can do because you're only telling the truth. So there's no one answer, easy answer here, but establishing mindfulness, reflecting on the person, the situation, helps you to come to a good decision how to respond, rather than just reacting with anger or distress at that moment. 'Cause that's the temptation when we're not mindful, is we just become emotional when we're criticized or attacked or insulted, or someone says something untrue, we feel it's not fair, unjust, and the emotions come up, and then often we react in an unskillful way. Maybe we say something back to them, hurt them, or react in some way that we go away, we're unhappy, depressed, upset, and so on. So establishing mindfulness and reflecting with wisdom always helps. And some things we just have to accept. Maybe it's just old karma. This is where you need your equanimity. Maybe this person earlier on in your life, you've hurt them and they're coming back to insult you because you've hurled insults at them before. Maybe you can't remember what you said in the past. Maybe it was a past life, who knows. So even the Buddha had to face this. Occasionally people cooked up untrue accusations against the Buddha. Everyone around the Buddha is sure the Buddha is pure, is a good person, is a wise and compassionate teacher, but still an accusation might come in from a jealous, another meditation master might jealously, because they're not enlightened, they're jealous, follow their jealousy, and they cook up some accusation against the Buddha to try and pull people away from him, perhaps. And the Buddha would have to face that. So like with the lady who was hired to claim that the Buddha got her pregnant, and she stuffed a cushion or a wooden frame up her skirt to make herself look pregnant, and she walked around the town saying, "Oh, the Buddha, why do you have faith in the Buddha? He's such a poor teacher, he's got no virtue, he got me pregnant and he's still going around claiming to be an enlightened Buddha. He's such a terrible fake." And people were questioning, thinking, maybe it's true, she seems to be pregnant, and if she knows who the father is, well, this is the Buddha must be a real fake, we should turn away from the Buddha. So some people did question that, and Venerable Ananda said to the Buddha, "Oh, everyone's getting upset by the words of this woman, maybe we should move away to another town, another area." And the Buddha said, "Well, it's not true. Why do we need to move away? If we move away to a new place and then she follows us there, or the people there start accusing us, what will we do then?" And Ananda says, "Well, we'll move on somewhere else." And the Buddha says, "Well, what will we do if in that new place they carry on making accusations, false accusations? What will we do then?" And Ananda says, "Well, we'll move on again." And the Buddha said, No, these accusations are not true. We're going to stand firm, we'll just carry on practicing, doing our practice here, and they're not true, so we don't need to prove anything to anyone because they're not true, and this will become apparent to people after a while. So within a few days, this woman who was making all the false claims, walking around town, she blew it. She had this fake pregnant tummy under her skirt, and at one moment it fell out and someone saw, oh, she's faking it. The wooden frame and the cushion that she was holding under her dress fell out. They realized it was all just fake. And people turned on the woman because they realized the Buddha was pure and this woman was just making up a story. So often just being patient and sticking to what you know is true is a good way to respond to those situations. But you have to have the patience, the equanimity to do that. Because if you respond with anger, well, you're going to make things worse for yourself. Maybe you give power and some fuel to the situation. That person's anger may get worse, your anger gets worse. Generally you make worse decisions when you're angry and you do more harmful things. That doesn't help anyone. So often we do have to be patient and accept we've made some old karma in the world. We've all insulted somebody at some point in our life. So some of this will come back to us in this very life, and we have to be accepting of that, humble, and learn a lesson and say, well, I'm not going to do that again. Ajahn Chah used to say, if people say untrue, unkind things about us, you really don't have to do much. Just establish mindfulness and reflect on it. What are they saying? Is it true? Is it not? If it's not true, there's no need to get angry because it's not true. If it's true, there's no need to get angry because it's true. And sometimes you just have to accept. Someone's criticizing you, it's true, and you say, yeah, that's correct. I had a friend who was walking through the village on alms round one day as a monk, and someone for some reason didn't like him, one of the villagers, and they said, a monk who receives alms and is not grateful for the alms, the food that he is given, is a bad monk. And this monk reflected, well, that's true, isn't it? If you are given support by the laity and you're ungrateful, unappreciative, you are a bad monk. So he thought, that's true. And he walked on, and he wasn't suffering, because what they had said is true. They had directed it his way, trying to stir him up, but he just reflected on the truth of their words and decided there's no need to get angry, because it's true. If as a monk you get angry, then you're a bad monk, and there's no way around that. But if you don't get angry, you're not a bad monk. Or Ajahn Chah to the villager who came to complain to him that her friends were kept stabbing her in the back, gossiping about her, calling her bad names. And in Thailand, the bad name might be, you're a dog. A dog is a really kind of lowly creature in those situations. To call someone a dog is really nasty. So she said, they called me a dog. So Ajahn Chah just said, what's the problem? If they call you a dog, all you need to do is get your hand, put it around your back and feel, is there a tail? If there's no tail, then you're clearly not a dog. Their words are meaningless. End of problem. So we have to learn to reflect like this on situations so that we don't just react with our emotions all the time, but we can reflect what's true, what's not. And if someone is angry with us and insulting us, well, maybe develop some compassion for that person, because it's an expression of their suffering and they're making some unskillful karma for themselves by insulting us. So rather than acting with anger, maybe just feel sorry for them, wish them well, hopefully that their state of mind improves, and then they'll probably stop insulting us.
Dear Lung Pa, what is mundane right view and what is supra-mundane right view? With thanks and metta.
Right view is an essential part of our practice. Right view, right understanding of the way things are. Sammaditthi. So it's the first factor of the Eightfold Noble Path. The way that is the path that leads out of suffering. You have to establish some right view, right understanding of the way things are. And we do that firstly by listening to the Dhamma, so associating with wise teachers, wise people, wise friends is an essential factor in developing right view. Before you've heard the Dhamma, before you've read a Dhamma book or met a teacher, you may have some wisdom, but often it's not very clear, and we may have a lot of wrong views and misunderstandings, wrong beliefs in things, superstitions and so on. So listening to the good Dhamma from wise people and associating with wise people is an essential part of the practice to help develop right view. But then also remembering some of that Dhamma. You can't just hear it but then forget it all again. You have to remember it and process it, think it through, learn about what you've learned, what you've heard, process it, reflect on it, come to understand it internally and start relating your own personal experience to what you've heard from the Buddha or from different teachers. This is an essential part of the practice. And in the beginning, our right view is what we call mundane right view. We just heard the words, and they may make sense, and they may give us good advice, good instructions in our life, but it's on the more ordinary level. So like the Buddha gave examples, mundane right view is just the thought, my mother, my father are important, and they've helped me a lot in my life, and appreciating the importance of the relationship of your mother and father, even though sometimes we disagree with them or have different characters, different interests from our parents, you can never deny the fact that there's this special relationship, that they gave birth to you, brought you up, helped you when you were totally helpless as a baby and as a child. That's an example of mundane right view, just recognizing the important and special relationship you have to your parents. Teachers as well, particularly spiritual teachers, just recognizing the importance that there are spiritual teachers in the world, particularly renunciants, monks and nuns who have gone forth and left the home life into the world and are practicing the Dhamma for Nibbana. Just recognizing that those people exist and that they're important. Recognizing the importance of karma. Actions have their results. Everything we think, say and do intentionally will bring a result, a consequence back to us. It's the same for us, same for other people. So a basic understanding and acceptance or belief in karma and the law of karma. There is such a thing as good karma. Good actions lead to good results. Bad karma leads to bad results. So when you come to a Buddhist monastery or a temple, you are hearing a lot about this, reminders to make good karma, avoid making bad karma for your own good. This is what we call mundane right view, just the basic level, ordinary level that isn't solely understood by Buddhists. Many people have right view in this world and they may not be Buddhist, but a lot of it is just common sense, you might say. But then we have what we call super mundane right view, or transcendental right view, lokutara samadhiti, which is the right view that develops through the practice, and particularly the practice of sila, samadhi, panya, developing mindfulness, practicing mindfulness regularly, frequently, continuously, and then experiencing states of samadhi, states of calm, where the mind goes beyond the normal distractions and of the hindrances, and one develops some clear awareness so that one can reflect more deeply on the Four Noble Truths, in particular, as we were talking about earlier, learning to recognize suffering and understand suffering and dukkha, the unsatisfactory nature of physical, mental phenomena. They're all subject to change, arising and ceasing, recognizing the selfless nature of phenomena, recognizing that body, physical form, and mental phenomena, so feelings, memories, thoughts, and sense consciousness, these are all what we call selfless, without a self. These are conditioned things that arise and cease according to the different causes and conditions that lead them to arise and then pass away. They're not a self. So this body is not a self. The thoughts you have are not, ultimately they're not a self, a person, a being. They're thoughts prompted by previous karma and so on. So lokutara or transcendental right view is bringing the mind to really see and experience the Dhamma, see the truth of the way things are. What is suffering? What is its cause? The craving that stimulates suffering, leads on to attachment, becoming, and birth, more birth. Seeing that and then experiencing nirodha, the cessation of suffering when the mind lets go of its craving and attachment. Even if only for a minute, you can experience a minute of nirodha, the third noble truth, just by letting go of some craving that's arisen in your mind, establishing mindfulness, using the breath meditation, for example. You have some greed or some anger arise in your mind at that moment, but you establish mindfulness, you reflect on it as an impermanent mental state, you let it go, the sense of self forming around that mental state disappears, and you experience a moment of Nirodha, the third noble truth. And the fourth noble truth is the path, the practice we develop from right view right through to right mindfulness and right samadhi. So Lokuttara, or transcendental right view, is developing clear insight into these Four Noble Truths to the point where they're actually changing our whole view of ourselves and the world, the way the mind operates, and ultimately liberating the mind from dukkha and the causes of dukkha, which is what we want. Ajahn Chah used to say, he'd answered questions differently on different occasions, but one time a monk asked him, "Luang Por, what is the most important thing we have to develop in the practice?" And he answered, right view, sammaditthi. Because he said, if right view is established, then all your other activities, whether it's just the way you think, the way you view things, your actions, your speech, what you decide to do day by day, all becomes right, correct. So the Buddha compared it to a lamp. We're walking through this world, even though it's light, actually our mind is still dark as long as there's no right view. But as soon as you establish right view, you reflect on the Dhamma you've heard, you understand it, and you start acting accordingly. It's like you're turning a lantern on in the dark. You start to see the way that will lead out of suffering in any situation at any time. So it's like this lantern that's illuminating the path to Nibbana. So it might be, when somebody makes you angry, they insult you, anger arises at that moment and you're sitting there festering, the anger is festering and you're just thinking about them. They shouldn't have said this, why did they say that? It's not fair. You might say at that moment you're caught into a moment of wrong view and the sense of self comes up very strong. There's a strong emotional reaction, there's feeling, there's mental proliferation in a negative way, there's suffering. But then a moment later you might have a right view arise and this anger is based on a feeling, an unpleasant feeling, a train of thought, but it's not a self, it's not a person, it's a mental state, and that feeling is karmic. It's the resultant karma, as I said before, maybe I've insulted this person or somebody in the past and now this person is insulting me. It comes to me as my old karma. I hear the words, I see the person, the unpleasant feeling arises, but this is not self. It's impermanent, it's not self. You have a moment where transcendental right view arises, and rather than running with the angry reaction, your mind says, no, I'll just let it pass. And the feeling passes, the angry train of thought subsides, and the mind goes back to peace. Even in the midst of that situation, that can happen when right view is there, because you don't want to make fresh, unskillful karma in that situation by having an argument or following your anger into some unskillful situation. You just let the angry thought and feeling subside. If that is done with right view, with wisdom, then that's the end of it, isn't it? You haven't fed it and you haven't created any additional extra suffering in that situation. Even though it's unpleasant, your mind goes quiet. And this is why the noble ones, they no longer create unskillful karma in their lives because they have got right view established, or transcendental right view. They understand the Four Noble Truths and they practice accordingly. So they get pain, they get ill, but they don't attach to that illness with wrong view and say, oh, I am ill, and suffer with it and worry and get anxious and afraid by it. They just understand bodies get ill. Whatever the illness is, you just have to put up with it. If there's some medicine that can cure you, good. If not, you have to accept that. They don't create fresh suffering out of that illness or that painful experience. They know the nature of the world. They don't get deluded by the world. They know any kind of craving always leads to suffering. So even when good things happen, pleasant things happen, and we have pleasure and pain in this life, they don't grasp at that pleasure with craving, wanting to hold on to it, wanting it to last forever, because they have right view. They know it doesn't last forever. No pleasures last forever. So while it's happening, you can enjoy it, but you don't grasp or crave at it, because you see the suffering of that. So right view can arise just for a few moments and then you lose it again, but for the area, it's established. They never lose it again. So their whole way of looking at their experience has changed for the better. So like say for the Sotapanna, the stream enterer, they have right view established. They no longer will think thoughts to break the precepts. It just doesn't come out because they know that's going to lead to more suffering. So they don't think to kill, to steal, to cheat on their partner or cheat with someone else's partner. They don't think to tell lies or get drunk. Those thoughts have disappeared from their mind because of the presence of right view. So the Sotapanna, they say, has cut off the worst kinds of suffering that humans can experience in this life or in future lives. They say they've cut off the route to hell because there was that way of thinking and acting has gone from their character, their mind. They just don't respond to even very difficult situations like that. So I always remember when I was a young monk, there was a teacher we used to respect greatly, Forest Ajahn, and he was considered to be enlightened, and he was coming back into his monastery from alms round in the morning, going to the village with a group of monks, and they're walking back into the monastery in the forest with their bowls. And in this forest monastery there are a number of deer, and in the mating season the male deer get because of the hormones, they get very agitated, and they'll see anybody as an enemy because they're fighting over the female deer. So even monks can become a target. So the senior monk, he's walking back into the monastery at the head of the line, and the male deer that was rutting, it was very agitated, saw him and just charged him. And these deer, like the deer in our monastery here, they have big antlers, horns. So it knocked the monk to the ground and stuck its horn into his stomach in anger and pulled the horn back, and his stomach came out with it. So the monk didn't die, but he was in agony. There was blood everywhere, and some of his guts had come out. He's lying on the floor. So the other monks quickly surrounded him to protect him from the deer and shooed the deer away. But some of the lay villagers coming in, villagers, they're farmers, they often carry machetes just for their farm work. They carry machetes, they're walking behind the monks, they saw the deer attack their teacher, so their response was to run to the deer, surround the deer with their machetes, and they were going to kill it out of desire to protect the teacher and just out of anger towards that deer. But the teacher, lying on the ground with his guts out, blood everywhere, he said, "No, don't do that. Don't hurt it. It's just following its instincts. It doesn't know what it's doing." The mind of avijja, ignorance, is like that. It doesn't know what it's doing. I forgive it. Just let it go. So the men, the village men, were actually a bit upset. They wanted to get it, but they weren't allowed to. The monk stopped them. So out of respect for the monk, they didn't attack the deer. They let it go. But why is that happening? It's because of right view in the mind of the monk. He understands this. He has to accept it's happened. Once a deer charges you, you can't change that fact. It's happened. The next thing to do is go to the hospital to get your wound dressed and get it treated. But there's no point taking out your anger on the deer because the damage is done. Now the time is to reflect on maybe forgiveness, compassion towards the deer, and acceptance of old karma. So right view is like that, establishes the right way of thinking, responding to a situation. And because that monk is enlightened, he already understands this body is not a self anyway. So there's no sense of, oh, he's hurt me, I should defend myself, this is not fair, this deer shouldn't attack me. The monk is not attached to his body anyway, he knows it's not a self. Transcendental right view is like that.
The last question is, Dear Ajahn, can you please kindly further explain the meaning of Samvega and Pasada in our context today?
So Samvega and Pasada are two Pali terms, two qualities that you often hear together, brought up together. Like many Pali terms from the Buddha's language, we don't have an exact translation in English. So Samvega, some people translate it as like a shock, a wake-up call. So like say you were asleep or dreaming and then something shocked you out of that, a loud sound, or somebody shook you and woke you up and you're shocked and stirred up out of your slumber, your dream or your sleep. Or somebody who has been drunk or drugged, intoxicated, and someone throws them a bucket of water, cold water over them and wakes them up out of their intoxication. So it's that kind of idea of waking up to the truth, to the reality. So you could say it's a realization of the way things are, and it can be quite shocking. So then it prompts one to seek a way out of suffering, because usually it's a realization of suffering and the unsatisfactory nature of one's existence. So it leads on to, we say, a sense of urgency. I've got to get out of this. So, for example, the Buddha said, reflect on your body, your 5 khandhas, as like a house on fire. So if you woke up in the night and your house is on fire, what would you do? You would try to get out quickly because it's on fire. So Samvega, it's both the realization of danger, of suffering, of problems, and then also the urgent desire to get out, get away from that. So it's a wholesome state of mind. It's both emotion and wisdom together, you might say. But it's a skillful thing, even though it sounds, sometimes they even translate it as distress, or sadness. Sadness, seeing the way things are, because one is seeing life almost as fruitless, in the sense the things you've been pursuing, the happinesses and all the ideals you had, you're realizing they're not going to do the job. They're not going to bring you to ultimate happiness. And it's that realization where you sober up, you realize you awaken up to the truth. So for the Buddha, this happened when he left the palace. Because his father knew he was, as a boy, a bodhisattva, he had a lot of spiritual inclination and was probably seen as quite a spiritual, special boy. His father really protected him because he knew if he saw some of the suffering of life, he'd want to find a way out of that. The father already realized that, so he did everything he could to stop the Buddha from seeing any kind of pain, suffering, that side of life, because he didn't want him to experience samvega, you might say. So only when he was a young man, an adult, he went out into the town from the kind of pampered, closeted existence in this palace. He went out and he noticed sick people, old people, corpses, funerals taking place. This gave rise to samvega, seeing the sadness of life, the fact that however good it gets, it's still impermanent. We still get old, get sick, die. However much power, fame, fortune, all the good things you can find in this world are still limited. They're unsatisfactory because they don't last, and they can't stop you from getting old, getting sick and dying. So he had that really strong realization. So it was like a shock to him. But then the last kind of thing he saw before going back to the palace was the monk walking through town. Peaceful, serene, mindful, receiving alms. And that gave him that vision of hope. Oh, there is a way out. There's the way of training the mind in mindfulness and insight, training the mind to understand the way to liberate the mind from its attachment to the world, because the world is bound up with dukkha, suffering. So it's like Samvega leads to that sense of urgency. I've got to practice. So that's why the Buddha had us do this chant every day. I'm the nature to age, sicken, die. I'll have to separate from everything I love and like. That's for sure. It's to wake us up and give us this sense of urgency. Pasada is a word that usually comes together with saddha, faith. And it means that clarity of mind where one sees there is a way out. So it's a positive emotion in that sense. It's clarity, and it's also connected to the word radiance. So there's a radiance, the brightening up of the mind when you see there is an escape from this terrible situation where you're still exposed to suffering, the suffering of the world, aging, sickness and death. There's a way out, and that's the Eightfold Noble Path that leads to Nibbana. So pasada is a moment of wholesome dhammas arising, the brightening of the mind and the clarity, seeing the path, the light at the end of the tunnel, you might say. So Samvega and Pasada often quoted together, these two qualities. It's like waking up to the suffering of one's existence, but then also the brightening of the mind, seeing a way out. So for me, when I was a teenager and got into Buddhism, I had one very strong moment of Samvega when I was in a pub, an English pub. They've just opened the English pub, so maybe a few people are going to have Samvega tonight. Sitting in a pub with my friends, about 17 years old. Oops, 18 years old. And you go and have a drink and you're talking and people are smoking and there's music and it should be a kind of enjoyable time, and it can be, but there was one occasion where I had this strong feeling of this is all pointless. I was sitting with my friends and I just stopped talking and I just went inside, my mind went inside, and I thought, you can't drink yourself to happiness. You can't, the socializing, the happiness, the things that we call happiness in life, they're only temporary, very temporary. They can't really solve our deeper problems as human beings. And the mind went inside, very peaceful, and then I thought of the Buddhist teachings, which I was just beginning to practice, read about and learn about. And I had this sort of sense of the mind just moving out of that situation, seeking. I thought, I've got to become a monk. All of that happening in one short space of time, in one evening in a British pub. So it can be like that. You do something that maybe normally you enjoy, and it passes the time, fills your mind with a certain amount of pleasure, but then there's that stepping back from it and realizing that this is only temporary and it can't really bring me lasting happiness. And then the thinking or seeking something better. The Buddhist path, the Buddha and the teachings of the Buddha, something like that. So I think that's the end of the questions tonight, is it? So maybe I'll leave you with those reflections tonight.